Right, so welcome to Garden Hour. My name is Amanda Bachmann. I'm with SDSU Extension based here in the Pierre Regional Center, and I am joined tonight by two plant people, which is very exciting. I cannot wait to hear some perhaps tips and tricks for my own garden because as a bug person, sometimes my plants suffer. But first, we'll be joined by Kristina Harms, who's a graduate research assistant in Dr. Lang's lab. And Kristina, what are you going to be sharing with us this evening?
I'll be talking some on sweet corn, a little bit of the brief overview. There's a more in-depth overview on sweet corn from last year's Garden Hour in 2024, and then a little more focus on the USDA and marketable standards and what you should look for in your harvest of sweet corn.
Very cool. This is going to take me back to grad school, where I also did work on sweet corn. And we also have Dr. Kristine Lang with us, who is our SDSU Extension Consumer Horticulture State Specialist. And Christine, what are you going to be sharing with us this evening?
Well, I'm going to provide some context for why you haven't seen me on Garden Hour thus far and what our team's been up to in Brookings to complement what Christine is going to be talking about for her research at the SDSU Southeast Farm. And I will sprinkle in some tips and tricks that we have learned over the past few weeks of trying some new research trials.
Awesome. I cannot wait to see what you guys have been up to. And for folks joining us live at home, you can ask us questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If you keep an eye on the chat, that's where we'll drop links and things as they come up. If you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to raise your hand or shoot us a message and we'll try to help you out. But just remember those questions in the Q&A and we'll field them at the end of each segment and then also again at the end of our hour tonight. So with that, I will turn things over to Kristina.
Thank you. All right. We should all be seeing the same screen, hopefully. Um, so I am doing research in sweet corn, which is why I get the privilege of talking about it. And as always, it's so sweet to talk about sweet corn. So sweet corn is one of the edible versions of corn that we produce here in South Dakota. It's a domesticated crop that has been around for quite a long time. There's a lot of discussion about the history of sweet corn and corn production all the way back to Native Americans in North America. Sweet corn is the variety that was first listed by the USDA seedsman in 1828 as a very sweet vegetable. The research that we're doing specifically is at the SDSU Southeast Research Farm in Beersford, South Dakota. One of the things with sweet corn that a lot of people don't know is sweet corn is typically open pollinated, which means that it should not be around a different type of corn within 1,000 feet because of cross contamination that can happen with open hybrid or open pollinated hybrids. From the sweet corn, there are 4 different types of sweet corn themselves. They're sugary, sugary enhanced, super sweet or shrunken, and synergistic. Each one has different properties that the corn utilizes. So sugary will be sweeter, but it has a lower shelf life days. Whereas like the synergistic isn't quite as sweet. Excuse me, isn't quite as sweet as the sugary type, but it does have a longer shelf life. And the super sweet also has that longer shelf life as well. The higher the sugar content, the greater the corn is susceptible to turning starchy if it is cross-contaminated. Um, so a few just brief things about sweet corn and sweet corn growth. Sweet corn really likes warm temperatures. It is a warm season grass. This year we have been actually struggling a little bit with that sweet corn because every time we get those warmer temperatures, some cold front keeps coming up from the south and giving us the nice moderate spring we're having, but it is stunting the growth. So all of these photos are from the 2024 growing season. Seedlings really like the 65-degree temperature. There are some varieties that can be planted down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but without that warmer temperature, the seeds won't germinate as quickly. Sweet corn likes to be in 6 to 8 inch spacing and a 1.5 to 2 inch depth. Usually the seedlings will emerge 4 to 10 days after planting. Again, that does depend on the temperature and the warmth. We're currently at about 2 weeks after planting, and we've had about 50% germination on average. The bare ground treatment is definitely the best because the soil has that potential to warm up faster with the optional sun that we get every once in a while. As the sweet corn grows, it depends on those limiting nutrients, but it also grows through the vegetative and reproductive stages. These are both defined by the leaves that are visible on the corn stalks. Each leaf collar is one growth stage. Typically, the reproductive growth stage comes um, when you first start to see the silk. So then once the ear is formed, at the R3 growth stage, that's when sweet corn's harvested because there's the most milk in the kernels. Sweet corn is usually fertilized both at the beginning of the season and also in about mid-season when the corn is about that knee-high or the V6 stage. That's usually the second fertilizer application of side dressing. Sweet corn harvest, again, it usually happens at that R3 stage where the milk is the best, I guess, in the sweet corn. The milk stage usually occurs about 20 to 25 days after the first silks appear. When you harvest sweet corn, if people haven't harvested sweet corn, you grab the ear and you pull it down. It's really easy to take off the stalk. It definitely helped last year to be able to harvest without needing to carry around a harvest knife, so I enjoy that aspect of it. Once sweet corn is harvested, it is best to store at 32 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit within an hour. Usually sweet corn does need to be eaten pretty quickly, about 5 to 7 days, but I know there's a lot of people who will process the sweet corn or can it. Personally, I enjoy freezing sweet corn. I think it's the best way to have it after it's no longer fresh on the cob. Um, so some of the research that we did, aside from just learning a lot about sweet corn over the past year, is we are looking specifically at sweet corn in the effects of tillage and clover living mulch systems. So we have a white vicura clover, a red clover, a white clover, and then a bare ground system. Historically, the plots have had till or no till, and then with or without landscape fabric for 2 years prior to the sweet corn going in. In order for the sweet corn to grow, we did strip till all of the plots just to ensure that the direct seeding corn would germinate, as previous research has shown that in a no-till system, it is harder for the corn to grow, or well, any crops to grow and compete with the clover treatments. Some of the other systems that we did throughout for data collection included biomass events to compare the weeding and clover growth competition. We also looked at chlorophyll spad meter readings, and then we also looked at the harvest data. So for the 2025 season, the clover was established back in 2023, so it's in its 3rd season. We did the strip till on April 16th of 2025. This was earlier than last year, so the clover didn't need 2 strip tills, but we still were able to get a decent path before the rains came for the corn to compete with. The corn was planted on May 14th, and then the estimated harvest that we have is between August 4th and August 8th for the sweet corn this year. So the biggest thing that we're comparing the sweet corn on is the USDA marketable standards for sweet corn production and growth. The USDA compares sweet corn with husk on and husk off. So we have 2 different standings for it, but the husk off is the bigger one because that is being able to look at the kernels and the ear itself. So some of the categories that the USDA has, they have the ear length, the pest damage, the ear tip fill, the maturity, and the the ear development, which includes the straightness or the crookedness of the ear. So the way that we looked at it is we gave it a numerical value, and then for each ear, we judged it based off the 5 categories, and then the total score was the label that the corn ear was put under. The pest damage, the ear tip fill, and the kernel maturity all were percentages of the corn ear. So it was about like I think it was about 10 to 20%, which fully comes to about 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches, as you can see on the diagrams for how the pest damage and the ear tip fill really compare. The kernel maturity and the development overlap a little bit because if the ear is not developed properly, the kernels aren't quite mature either. Most of the kernel maturity was easy to tell by looking at it, but it's also proper to test the maturity of the kernels by pressing your thumb into it with your fingernail. And if it pops nicely, then it's mature. If you press it in and it doesn't pop nicely or it just kind of smushes, the kernel was not mature um, in its production. So as we went forward and we're analyzing last year's data, the bare ground did have the highest number of US #1 ears. One of the reasons for that is, as you saw on the previous slide, the US #1 needed a perfect score, so it could have 0 blemishes of any kind. That made it really hard for any of the ears to be in the US #1 category. Um, and so the bare ground just was able to produce the highest number of those. But when we were looking at the total of just ears that were able to be sold and to be marketed, the clover and the bare ground varieties were all very close to each other. I believe they were all within about 5% of each other for the marketability and the sale category. The white, red, and Cura clover did actually mature later than the bare ground treatment, which was also very interesting. Kind of consistently throughout the season, it was seen that they were about a week behind the bare ground treatment. So I was really expecting the ears to not have quite as good quality. So for the end of the season, for them to come back and have produced enough marketability, it was really nice to see that as the final outcome for the clover treatment kernel production. And then this is about how far we are so far this season. We've done some biomass, done the planting, and then on the far right of the screen, since we have had cooler season this spring, along with quite a bit of rain, not as much as last year, but still quite a bit of rain, with the single strip till pass, the no-till plots have actually grown back quite a bit in the clover treatments. So I think this year going forward, it will be really interesting to see how that how that plays out and if it's a bit different than last year, where last year there wasn't too much comparison between till and no-till, but this year there might actually be a larger input just with the competition from the clover and strip till situation. These are some resources, the funder of the project and contact information. Do we have the questions?
So we don't have any questions from the audience, but man, grading those ears took me back. So one of the things that folks who are growing garden or growing corn at home might be curious about is like, how many corn plants do you need to have in a stand so that they'll actually like pollinate each other and you'll get that good ear fill?
Yeah, most of the resources that I was finding were recommending that you have about 4 rows of corn in order to have good cross pollination and actually have good ear fill. Corn tassels can spread pollen up to that 1,000-foot radius, so it does get that's one reason that cross contamination is very concerning. So in that case, it can actually, if you have say one on one side of your garden and one on the other side of the garden, you'll still get the cross pollination, but a lot of times it is recommended to have 4 rows so that they're close together and able to pollinate each other.
And also so that there's maybe something left if the raccoons get in it.
That's true.
Were you guys seeing any insect damage in your trials?
Last year, we were actually really lucky. There weren't a lot of insect damage. We had a lot of aphids, but they were mostly on the outside of the corn ear. They didn't quite get into the corn.
Mhm.
We did see a couple corn borers, but again, they didn't quite affect the corn as much as they should. I know last year in the plots that the corn has moved to, so where my cabbage was last year, we did see a lot of it's not army worms, it's the other ones. Um, but we saw a lot of worms, so I'm a little bit more worried this year for the corn. But again, we'll have to see what the season brings.
Yeah, and I remember growing up eating a lot of corn. Pennsylvania is a very big sweet corn producing state as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got real good at being able to like cut the top off if you see like a caterpillar in there. It's
Hmm.
kind of a problem when they like bore through like the middle of the ear, but usually it's just tip damage. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's sweet corn is tasty. There's a lot of things out there that also enjoy eating it.
It's true. I know last year the biggest pest problem was the grasshoppers. We had a lot of grasshoppers
Mm,
eating our silk before tasseling happened, so there was a lot of concern about no ear formation just due
hmm.
to grasshopper damage.
Yeah. Yeah, grasshoppers, man. They'll get almost anything.
Which begs the question. I'm going to interject a question,
Go
Amanda.
for it.
Be worried about another grasshopper plague in southeast South Dakota, or are they going to stay further west this year?
I mean, so the thing with the grasshopper is that as long as you are not the only green thing, like grasshoppers can like coexist and be just fine and not move into the valuable like cash crops. But if it does, if we do get sort of like get into a dry pattern and the corn is the only thing that is green, then we might have a problem. Um, but I mean, based off
And
our
that
meeting earlier today, Southeast South Dakota did get hit with some rain, so fingers crossed.
that could be one of the things because a lot of the grasshopper damage happened after the corn was tall enough to canopy. And once the corn canopies, it was minimizing the clover growth. So the grasshoppers might have moved from the clover to the corn because you took a step and there was about a cloud in front of you,
Yeah.
along with the mosquitoes. So,
Yeah, I feel like that sweet corn canopy is like a little rainforest as you get
yeah.
in there. Well, very cool. And if folks have questions for Kristina, feel free to put those in the Q&A and we'll get those at the very end. But for now, we'll move on to Dr. Lang.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here after kind of a long hiatus, if I'm being really honest. And we'll swap that presenter view. Amanda, does that look correct?
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. All right. Before anyone asks, Kristine, did you get a new office? I am in the exact same spot on campus, but I did get a paint job and hung art and displayed books differently. So for anyone who is really big on subtle differences, yes, Kristine got an office remodel, but she has not moved, still in Brookings. So I just wanted to share some of the exciting things we're up to in Brookings for our research this year. And it went from a season of we were going to do a lot of things to, oh, maybe we weren't going to do too many things, to if you give me a blank canvas, aka a specialty crop field, suddenly I find myself wanting to do all of the things, as Kristina and my team have just figured out over the last couple of weeks. So we are doing kind of some new projects and focusing on some preliminary data. A huge congratulations to Hannah Voy and Connor Roon, who have both graduated with their masters successfully this spring. We were very excited for them. So soil tarping and onion research has wrapped up, and we have research findings on our website. And broccolini integrated with living mulch has also wrapped up. And we have several versions of research reports from our specialty crop field, as well as some really fun on-farm trial reports that are also on our research website. So what are the new things that we're up to this year? It is just from the nature of grant cycles, less to do with what's going on in the federal government and way more to do with the timeline of how Kristine applied for grants. So nobody panic. I'm not going anywhere as far as I know. But I just want to share that one of the grants that is just getting underway is focused on using those new high tunnels we built on campus. So if folks have paid attention to garden hour or been to a field day, you know that we constructed two new bright, shiny 30 by 96 high tunnels over the last year. And I'm really, really happy to say that they survived 60-mile-per-hour windstorms on multiple occasions. And some of the tips and tricks there, even if you have a small high tunnel at home, is having that double layer of plastic with that inflation fan going at all times is really helpful for withstanding windstorms, because the minute any little bit of plastic starts to wave and cut loose, pretty soon it's waving and ripping and there it goes. So that's my first tip for you. Even if you're doing a small high tunnel or a small greenhouse, if you can do 2 layers of plastic with a simple inflation fan plugged into an outlet or on a solar panel that doesn't get covered with snow over winter, or a battery, that goes a long way in helping high tunnels over winter, because I know some folks haven't been as fortunate, and some of the smaller structures or things like caterpillar tunnels were damaged in some of the spring winds. But our high tunnels are still here, and we are embarking on a 3-year journey funded by a Specialty Crop Block Grant to fill those high tunnels with research. And we are going to treat this year as a preliminary data and screening year, which means that I kind of went bonker doodles with my shopping ideas, especially for lettuce. And we're kind of like spaghettiing it. We're going to throw things at the wall and see what sticks and see what the best performers are. And I'll get into lettuce in a minute. But first, we are going to be looking at some grafted tomatoes. There are a few research papers out there, not a ton, so hopefully we can add to this research. There is some research that shows that grafted tomatoes can improve drought tolerance and reduce heat stress on tomatoes. One of the biggest signs of heat stress in your garden or in a high tunnel or a greenhouse is you'll see those blossoms start to turn brown and crinkle up, and the blossoms will just drop off, and including the whole stem that the blossom is sitting on. When that happens, you're not getting fruit in that spot, or pollination can be really poor. So you might see the flower, you might have all of these flowers, but you might not see as much fruit. So this year, we're probably going to spend a lot of time paying attention to the flowers and the blossoms. We are a little bit behind the times, as you're about to see with my timeline, but I'm kind of focusing a little bit more on the initial plant response this year. And I did some digging on some of the tomatoes that were recommended for heat tolerance. And then I also included BHN 589, because that is a nice determinate tomato that you can do a stake and weave or a simple, a very simple trellising system, because it really should not get taller than me in a normal world. So I was looking at BHN 589 compared to Jolene, which is another determinate tomato. So again, you can do a simple stake and weave. You shouldn't need to really do any pruning on that one. And that one's really touted as a heat tolerant tomato. And then I'm going to be comparing that to Estiva and Damsel, which are indeterminate tomatoes. So they're going to want to vine and go crazy. So in a high tunnel setting, you typically would trellis that to 1 or 2 vines and prune out the suckers to keep things going up and up and up like a vining plant. And what we're going to end up with is, non-grafted tomatoes that are just growing on their own roots and hanging out. And then we are also going to graft tomatoes, which is a photo here on the right, where you take that desirable top portion, so your Jolene, your Estiva, your Damsel, your BHN 589, and you put it on a desirable rootstock. And those desirable rootstocks are not bred for tastiness or eating. You would not want to grow them out. Many of them are crossed with one of the wild type species, and the tomatoes are small and green and nasty tasting. Not that I've tasted them, but they don't look edible. But they have root systems that can resist soil-borne diseases. They might have finer roots that can mine for more water or nutrients. And so they have properties that can help that top portion grow better. And this is very similar to grafting apples or grapes or any of those fruit trees that we love. The great news with tomatoes is we get to graft them when they're 2 to 3 weeks old. So they're a lot nicer to work with than the woody plant material. So we're going to be looking at different grafted rootstocks that are available on the market. So DRO 141TX is one of the newer rootstocks. Estamino's been around for a little bit, and Maxifort is kind of the old standard now, maybe 10, 20 years old. It's not very old in the arc of time. But it is an older rootstock that a lot of research has been done on. So we kind of use that as our standard rootstock and compare some of the newer ones to that. So we're going to be grafting these tomatoes and transplanting them both into the high tunnel. And I'm going to do some open field just so we can get a sense of the heat damage in the high tunnel versus open field conditions. So again, we're just doing kind of a bunch of different comparisons to see what's going to work to take us into next season. And then the shopping list. I had someone ask me today, what lettuce varieties are you planting? And I drew a total blank. And it's probably because I had a heck of a time committing 17 different types of lettuce to memory. But things I can share is we started all of this lettuce from seed, and we're going to be transplanting it again into the field and into the high tunnel. And the method behind my madness for this shopping list was I tried to look at on-farm research trials and peer-reviewed research trials with the words lettuce, heat tolerance, heat stress, heat resistance, tried to do those types of keywords to find lettuce varieties that had been in other heat tolerance studies. A few of these were farmer recommendations, and a few of these might be lettuce that you're growing and enjoying yourself. I'm going to be growing all of these in more of a head or a single cut form versus cutting immature and doing salad mixes. So I want to look at, head formation, or some of these kind of form loose heads where you cut it and then it kind of falls apart into a salad mix. But I'm not going to be planting like a solid stand of lettuce and like cutting it at a very, very young age. So we're going to be transplanting out single plants using some form of a spacing between 6 to 12 inches between plants. And I'm going to be fine tuning that in the next week or so. So currently all of this lettuce is growing as transplants in our greenhouse, which you might be going, oh my gosh, you could have planted lettuce in your high tunnel ages ago. You're right. But because it's a heat tolerance study, we want to push that envelope. We want that high tunnel to be kind of cooking. I want to be really mean to this lettuce, which sounds awful. But we're actually going to do 2 rounds of planting. And I'm gonna stress this as much as possible this year to kind of see who are our top contenders. And I want the top contenders to move on to research trials in 26 and 27, where we would also like to look at some different mulching and soil management strategies. There are some farms that will use misters. Some farms use organic mulch for underneath their lettuce. Some farms use white plastic. Some do use black landscape fabric. Spoiler alert, I'm going to use black landscape fabric because I'm going to be really mean to this lettuce this year. But there's a variety of ways that folks, do try to beat the heat with their lettuce, or they just have a cutoff where, okay, we're not growing lettuce in a high tunnel anymore. But lettuce, because it grows so quickly, can continue to be a really profitable, what we call quick turn crop in a high tunnel. And who doesn't love lettuce in the middle of summer so that we can get the full package BLT? So I'm trying to grow like half of your BLT for you, your tomatoes and your lettuce. I don't think I'm integrating pigs onto my farm anytime soon, and I'm not really into small grains research, but I can get you a portion of the BLT. And I think my tip for lettuce, if anyone is starting it from transplants, is if you're someone who doesn't have the most nimbly bimbly fingers, a lot of lettuce seed can come pelletized. And that means it's been rolled in kind of a clay coating that's going to break down as you water it. And that makes it a lot easier to plant 1 lettuce seed per cell or 1 lettuce seed per pot. As Kristina and my team can attest to, lettuce seed is pretty small when it's not pelletized. Another thing to remember is lettuce really essentially is sown on the surface because it is one of our seeds that needs light to germinate. So if lettuce gets buried too deeply, or if you water and you like drive that seed further into your planting mix, that can create issues with germination. So those are some things to remember from a home gardening perspective as well. And if you're someone who loves a good timeline, we seeded our lettuce and tomatoes in the greenhouse in May. Was running a little bit behind, especially on the tomatoes, but we're going to run with it. I'm hoping that we can graft our tomatoes on June 9th. We are looking for 1 to 2 sets of true leaves on our tomatoes before we graft them. So I was going to try to push for that 2-week mark, but the plants don't look like they're going to be big enough by this Thursday to graft. So I'm going to be trying that on Monday, I believe. And then by June 18th, we should have nice rooted transplants of lettuce and be transplanting lettuce crop 1. We're going to immediately seed and start lettuce crop 2 and kind of piggyback it. So that way in July, again, July 10th is like an arbitrary date at this point, but kind of my best guess based on some timelines and looking at some other timelines from farmers in the Midwest. Our goal is to be harvesting lettuce crop number 1, transplanting out lettuce crop number 2. By the end of July, harvesting that second round of lettuce. So that should say round 2. And throughout July through September, we're going to be keeping track of blossoms on those tomatoes and looking at what our fruit set looks like. Also, we can kind of ask the question, what happens if your tomatoes are planted out really late because something crazy happened on your farm or in your garden that, caused you to get a late start? So sometimes my tardiness allows me to ask some of those questions as well. All right, rolling right along. We're also going to ask the question, what's the deal with wool mulch? So if you check out the South Dakota Specialty Producers YouTube channel, about a month ago, myself, Robin Butterbaugh, and Jaylyn Whaley gave a presentation on different types of mulch in the garden and on the farm. And Jaylyn spent a lot of time talking about wool mulch. So we're talking about the wool that is sheared off of sheep. And we are going to look at that as a 3-inch thick mulch on the surface of garden plots. And we're also going to look at pelletized wool, where that wool has actually been processed and compressed into kind of little, I don't know, like dime to quarter size wool nuggets. And there is some fertility value to wool based on analyses. And you can look it up on online stores or occasionally on the shelves of a garden center, and you can actually find pelletized wool as a soil amendment. So we are kind of looking at wool both as a mulch and a fertility source. And this project's in partnership with the Specialty Producers Association, the NRCS, the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition has at least one person who's doing this trial with us. And there are several SDSU Extension Master Gardeners, especially West River, who are involved in this trial. So a lot of credit goes to Melissa Niles, who is a contractor with Specialty Producers and an SDSU Extension Master Gardener. Oh, wrong direction. SDSU Extension Master Gardener for really kind of kicking this project off. And folks are going to be keeping track of the trial's already been implemented in a lot of these gardens. So Melissa's kind of worked with the master gardeners who are going to be doing the trial. But I would say watch our website for results. And, we never know if we might kind of expand the trial in the future. But folks are keeping track of their planting methods, the health of their crop, the weediness of the garden plots, and kind of their general yield of bell peppers. And we're all planting bell peppers in theory, maybe tomatoes as a backup, so that we can have kind of multiple sites all growing the same thing and have a larger set of data. Now, I can't leave well enough alone, so I also want to know, what about how this compares to black landscape fabric? And what about how it compares to layers of cardboard? And what if we use a white silage tarp? And, we've all been using straw for a long time, so how does raw wool 3 inches deep compare to straw 3 inches deep? So we are actually going to be implementing this trial tomorrow, and we're going to be transplanting 2 different types of bell peppers, Jupiter and Orange Blaze, out into our fields. And we'll have beds that are 3 feet wide by 10 feet long. And because my nerdiness runs deep, one of my students has already taken soil temperature and moisture sensors and set those up. And we're going to bury those 4 inches deep so that we can look at all these different mulching methods and what they do to affect moisture retention and soil temperature 4 inches deep, so very much within the root zone of those peppers. So stay tuned. I'm really excited to see where this research takes us. And then again, because I can't leave well enough alone and I had another high tunnel to work with, we are looking at 37 different types of direct sown flowers in a high tunnel versus a field. And Kristina can attest to the fact that we planted 7,000 plus flowers yesterday. I think all of us have sore backs, but we're hopefully healing. But we're looking at everything from celosia to zinnia to cosmos to calendula to yarrow to sunflowers, which are, you know, always a favorite, centaurea or bachelor's buttons. If you're wondering what in the world is matricaria, some people call it feverfew. It's a filler flower, and we're looking at a few different foliage plants as well. And I tried to, for any type of flower I picked, pick at least one comparison. So if we're going to look at asters, we're going to look at 3 different kinds of asters. If we're going to look at cosmos, we're going to look at 4 different kinds. I tend to not love cosmos as a cut flower, but there is a series called Double Click that is sold by Johnny's Seed that looked really, really beautiful in the photos. And so I want to see if it holds up in real life. So again, we're going to have 6 rows of flowers, or not going to have, we do have 6 rows of flowers planted in our high tunnel and 6 rows of flowers planted in our open field. And some of the pro tips I can share for that is it's very common in flower farming to use landscape fabric. We did no-till fields with black woven landscape fabric pinned over the top. We went with 8-foot wide wisps because it's a manageable roll to put in the back of a pickup truck. And you don't have to spend as much time pinning edges compared to using like a 3 or a 4-foot wide landscape fabric. So the photos on the left, you can see Gabby, one of our field assistants, making a template. And the goal of this template was to have a 6-inch diamond so that flowers are 6 inches from each other. And then she is using a simple a handle attachment attached to a propane burner, something we bought from a garden farm supply store. This one's really nice because it's click to light and it's just shooting out flame, and you're holding that as close as possible to landscape fabric and burning that hole really quickly. The pro tip I currently have, without getting into it too much, is if you are going to do decently high residue no-till, make sure that soil and residue is wet with a sprinkler or by hand before you pin that landscape fabric to prevent, you know, that landscape fabric from catching or any of those holes from, you know, catching on fire. So be mindful of fire hazards. And we had a really windy day yesterday, and we're glad that we were done with our landscape fabric. So I will say these wood templates are something that you can make at home. You just need a little bit of patience with math and a chalk line and a really good hole bit attached to a drill, and patience to do it. But it gives you a really nice planting grid, and it's really going to cut down on weeding. And then on the right-hand side, you can see Chloe and Carissa working on flower seeding. Shout out to Kristina. She was a huge help as well. But a lot of that flower seed is really, really tiny. So you can see there were different methods, and we did kind of switched up positions, but you do need a good bit of patience if you're going to direct sow a lot of these flowers. We really were trying to get flowers sown in each hole. Some folks will, you know, do a scatter method, or they will start these things from transplant. But we really do want to ask the question about, you know, direct sowing success in a high tunnel and open field. And we are going to start with sprinkler irrigation indoors and now outdoors since it didn't rain. But we will be installing drip irrigation because that's going to go, you know, whether you're using drip irrigation or a soaker hose or something that keeps water off the foliage and flower petals. Some flowers, Lysianthus comes to mind, are really sensitive to overhead watering. If you get water on those petals, they can get really mushy and gushy and gross. So we're starting with sprinklers to have nice wet seed beds for germination, and then we're going to be switching to drip irrigation. And last but not least, you might remember the clover plots where Alexis and Connor have worked on campus, and Kristina has similar plots down at the Southeast Farm. But we have tilled up strips of that beautiful clover carpet, and we are going to do 20 different kinds of pumpkins. And I really wanted to make some comparisons in production among orange, green. Only found one yellow that I was excited about. But 3 white, and then we're going to have gourds and minis. So really looking at number of fruit per plant and getting some general size. And I am very curious because Sean Toporek in the plant pathology realm is going to be working on some other studies with cucurbits, and he's like, oh good, your pumpkins can help attract all the cucumber beetles and squash bugs. So stay tuned for some data on susceptibility to cucumber beetles and squash bugs from my pumpkin project. Meanwhile, Sean Toporek will be smiling and really excited if I help draw in all of the cucumber beetles for his other research projects. So, teamwork. And if you want to learn more about, the research and what we're up to, this might be a great slide to just grab a photo of. And I'm guessing that Kira can drop extension.sdstate.edu events in the chat box for all of you. But we have a variety of field days going on across Eastern and Central South Dakota. And I think the big thing I want to highlight is we do have our annual specialty crop field day. Typically that's in September. Some of you have gotten very used to that. But we are going to bump that date up this year to July 29th from 5 to 8 p.m. And it is already our 5th anniversary, and I'm very excited about that. And if anyone is up in the Aberdeen region and would like some hands-on experience with putting plastic on a high tunnel, we're going to have a really fun event. It is an early morning because we want to beat the wind. But Chris Goldade from the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition is volunteering to host a workshop on his farm. So the QR code actually jumps you to registration for that event because registration for that is running through the Soil Health Coalition. So with the exception of June 20th, because construction and just a little harder to monitor little ones, but the rest of these events, July 8th through August 5th, are all very family friendly. So, bring the kids, the nieces, the grandkids, and come enjoy a field day learning about specialty crops. And if you get a rain day and need something to do, I'd encourage you to look back at the South Dakota Vegetable Short Course. Check out any of our research, including a deeper dive on the things that Kristina talked about this evening. And if you love roses, the latest round of winners for rough and tough roses that need little to no inputs was just released a few weeks ago. So you can read more about that. And last but not least, I have some big news to share, guys. I finally got a watering wand for my raised beds. So for anyone gardening on a deck or a patio or apartment, get the hose attachment for your kitchen sink or your bathroom sink. You will not be sorry. And get a soft hose that can run through your apartment or your home, and get the watering wand. It has revolutionized my watering experience. So that is my big news. I know many of you have watched my raised bed saga and known that I've been schlepping watering cans year over year. And I guess I should share the other big news, and the reason my husband doesn't want me schlepping watering cans anymore is I'm expecting my first little one in October. So I'll have a pumpkin to put in the patch. So stay tuned for more garden research and familial updates.
I feel like after last week when Sydney announced her engagement and now this week, I'm like, I don't think we can keep up this pace of garden hours special announcements.
Yeah, we've kind of set a high bar.
Yeah.
Next week, someone has to have like twins or triplets that they're
Yeah, I was gonna say
expecting.
I'll be in Kansas City. You guys are on your own.
Yeah, spoiler alert, it's not me. I'm just having one.
Right. One of the questions that came in was you got to it on the slide about offering tours of your high tunnels and the research center. So definitely grab those on the recording or check out the events page. But Kristine, if you want to throw I know a couple of those were very specifically high tunnels. So if you want to throw those in the chat, we've got folks who were looking for that information.
I can do that.
And then another question was, how does wool mulch compare in price?
Oh, that's a great question. So, my current take on this is if you can find a sheep farmer near you, the raw wool mulch might not be very expensive because the wool market is kind of in flux. And so some sheep farmers are like, you know what? I just need to get rid of this wool because I've sheared my sheep. So you might be able to get a really good price. The pelletized wool, very expensive. I spent over $100 for a 25-pound bag. And so I'm very curious to find out if it's worth it. So currently pelletized wool, very expensive. Raw wool, if you can find a sheep farmer near you, they might be really thrilled to talk to you. Rotoburros would want me to remind you that there are some food safety considerations, considering, you know, what the sheep might be getting into. So I wouldn't recommend wool mulch for like our lettuce and spinach crops at this time. The pelletized wool, because it's processed, should be heat treated and safe, but again, bear in mind some of the food safety considerations.
Awesome. Yeah, those were the questions. I am going to do some quick bug updates, and then we'll hopefully have some time for wrap-up questions. But if folks have those, remember to drop those in the Q&A, and we will grab them before we head out. And I will share my screen here. Okay, cool. So starting out as usual with things that I have found in my yard. As I was watering the other day, I noticed I looked in my one watering can and I had a daddy longlegs. And I was very sad because I thought I had accidentally drowned this poor little arachnid, but it was okay. I pulled him out and he dried off and was fine. But I wanted to throw the picture up there and maybe dispel a few myths about the daddy longlegs. Depending on where you're from, you might call them harvestmen. Or daddy longlegs, and then they're in the Opiliones order. So they are arachnids, not insects, but they're not spiders. They're actually in a different order than the spiders. They have just one body segment, so they look like a little pill or a little sphere with those spindly legs coming off of it. But these are totally harmless. There's a lot of, you know, cool wrong facts about arachnids on the internet, and quite a few of them are about Opiliones. These guys are not venomous, they're not poisonous, they couldn't bite people. None of that is actually true. So if you see these around your garden, totally fine, nothing to worry about. And I just think they're one of the cool sort of arthropods that's out there that I know a lot of people have interacted with. And then picking an insect repellent. Our mosquito populations are starting to kind of kick off as we have more rainfall across the state, maybe some patchy rainfall where we're getting some puddles, we're getting gutters filled up. Maybe you've forgotten to tip out the bird bath a couple times, or you filled up multiple watering jugs and you keep using the first two and that third one never gets used. So make sure to rotate, lesson from me. But this is also the time of year where we tend to have some of the best selection of various insect repellents in all of the different stores across South Dakota. So it's a good time to go peruse the shelf in the camping section and maybe pick up something new to try for 2025. But when you're picking an insect repellent, you want to keep in mind what critters you're trying to target. Mosquitoes and ticks are obviously the two big ones, but you should know that there are some repellents that are more effective for one versus the other. Pretty much everything out there right now is, good for mosquitoes at varying degrees, but it might not be, you can't assume that it's going to be good for ticks too. So definitely make sure that you're reading the label to not only know how and when to apply it, but also how frequently to reapply. Some things only last for like 15 minutes and you have to be reapplying frequently. So not every repellent or every formulation is created equal. You also want to take a look at that active ingredient, which you can kind of see on my picture here. It's the, fine print on the front of the bottle. And a lot of folks, DEET has been out for a very long time. It's very effective. Some folks want to avoid it. Totally fine. There are other EPA approved alternatives. Permethrin is one of the big ones, and that's one that you can apply to your gear so that your outerwear stays repellent for longer. But yeah, definitely go for an EPA approved active ingredient. I think I do this rant every year, but please don't mix together essential oils from a Facebook recipe. Those are not going to be effective long term. You definitely want to be using something that has an EPA approved active ingredient and making sure you're reading and following those label directions. And the pictures are not to endorse any brand. Just to note that last year when I was shopping for insect repellents, I noticed a formulation that was a clear gel formulation. So as somebody who doesn't always like trying to spray the back of my neck, I found that this formulation was really interesting to try because it was much easier for me to apply. So there's been sort of lots of developments in the sort of retail insect repellent space. So highly recommend checking some of those out and making sure that you're protected before West Nile virus season really kicks off. June bugs are out and about. I was just, on the I-90 corridor over this weekend. I went to a concert in Sioux Falls on Saturday night, and by about 10 o'clock, there were a lot of June bugs that were starting to pelt the stage because they were attracted to the lights. So this is sort of one of their larger years. About every 3 years, we see sort of quite a few adult June bugs. And, out in the prairie, like out in the large grasslands, their existence kind of gets mediated by the ecosystem. But in towns, you might notice large piles of these like under lights, especially at rest stops or gas stations. And the larvae are some of our white grubs. So you might find them, or you might have found a bunch last year in your turf, or you might notice secondary damage from raccoons and badgers and other things that are digging up the grubs to eat them. They're really not great flyers. These are the ones that are going to be bouncing against your screen at night, especially if you have a light on inside. But yeah, just wanted to throw out the alert that June bugs are out. They're active, especially southern South Dakota. So here in Pierre, I'm sure we'll be seeing them pretty soon. I know I've had a few that have been bouncing against my bathroom window at night, but we'll probably see a few more here in the coming weeks. And then in keeping with the theme of upcoming events, I know last week Robin shared the Native Plant Initiative plant sales, and I wanted to make sure that I threw the graphic on this week so everybody could see that because those are coming up June 6th, 7th, and 8th. So if you're here in Pierre on June 6th, you can check them out at the East Pierre Landscape and Garden Center. Then they're going to be in Spearfish on the 7th and then Rapid City on the 8th. And this is also on the Native Plant Initiative social media as well. But just wanted to make sure folks had those dates. Again, in the central South Dakota area, we'll be doing Little Wings on the Prairie, July 19th, which is a Saturday. And then I always sort of end the season with Insect Fest at McCrory Gardens on September 6th. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing. And we've got a whole bunch of things in the chat.
That is
awesome.
That's mostly my fault. But there was a question that came up after I was presenting about how long does it take wool to break down in the garden? Jalen Whaley, our sheep expert colleague, did a dive on the research and curated a nice article about wool mulch. And one of the research studies she looked at found that it takes about 2 years for that wool to break down. So that's something I'm actually really curious about, is like how much we would need to replace in subsequent years compared to straw, compared to, the plastic's not going anywhere. It's just slowly breaking down and becoming microplastics.
Is that breakdown on the pelletized wool that it lasts like 2 years, or just like wool in general?
She didn't super clarify. So I'm going to be very curious because we're going to have pellets on the surface and pellets in the soil. So I am curious about the difference of breakdown. And I will say for our research, this is going in soil that has been compacted and kind of used and abused due to the high tunnel construction. So like anything to improve the health of our soil, I'm really excited to track as well.
Yeah, that's like an interesting sort of, not that wool is a byproduct all the time, but like an interesting other use for this like agricultural product.
Yes, that is kind of our angle, and we think it's really relevant for South Dakota.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're already friends with a sheep farmer, like you are possibly like a step ahead.
Yes, definitely.
Well, very cool. We don't have any other questions in the Q&A, and we are getting close to the top of the hour. So we'll go around and just kind of do our final thoughts, any tips and tricks for the upcoming, next couple of weeks until maybe you see us again on Garden Hour. I know I'm going to be traveling next week, so when I get back to Garden Hour, I might have some, who knows what insects I'm going to see in Kansas City. Maybe none. I'm going to be in the middle of the city, but we'll find out.
Kristina, do you have a tip or trick based from what you're looking at with your sweet corn for the next few weeks?
Currently, it is just hoping for sunshine, I think, is the biggest thing that we need for the warm season grasses coming up here in the future.
Yep. Yeah. I'm a little worried that we're not going to get that warmth, especially those overnight temps this next week, but we do know that sunshine on black soil can warm up, which I know is a little counterproductive for our living mulch plots.
Yeah.
I think my tip or trick is for anyone who got some of that hail, a week and a half ago. I was looking at my plants just a couple days ago and thinking like, what's going on with all of these leaves? Do remember that even that teeny tiny hail pelting down on that plant material could have caused some bruising and damage. Cause I was like, insects, what's eating my garden? And then I immediately channeled my inner Amanda Bachmann
Thank you.
and thought harder and went, hail damage. So I did do removed the worst of the leaves and did do kind of a low dose liquid feed fertilizer to kind of help those plants recover. So that's my tip or trick. If you got hail, we're part of that hail fun in any of the recent events. Don't just jump to insects like I almost did.
Yep, yep. That is such a good tip because yeah, a lot of people do. You see all the damage and especially thinking about things like grasshoppers or even, earwigs if you've had a lot of moisture, some of those more generalist herbivores. But yeah, hail can, and if it happens overnight and you didn't sort of see the hail size or even realize that there was hail, it can just kind of appear and you're like, what's happening? Because yeah, the evidence kind of melts.
Yes, thankfully. And I will also say, I think my other piece of advice as folks are getting their gardens, transplanted in or seedlings are growing, when we first transplant out, you really want to keep that soil wet, or if you're trying to get seeds to germinate, you really want to keep that soil wet. But as things start to rut in, and you can do a simple tug test on your transplants, if they come right out and they still look like the shape of the garden center pot or the cell that you planted them out of, they're not rooted in. But if they're starting to resist, that means they are rooting deeper, and you can start to focus on more deep and infrequent waterings, which is going to force those roots to go down, make them less lazy, and it's really going to get us through the droughty months that might be in our near future, according to our state climatologist.
I know we did that gardening in a drought workshop and then we got like 3 inches of rain. So I don't know, maybe we'll just schedule another one of those and
Yep.
see if we can influence the precipitation patterns. But
If we can schedule one for like next week, I've got a lot of cover crops and grass seed I'm trying to get germinated, and we don't have enough sprinklers, hoses, or time in the day. So we might
yep.
need to schedule another drought event to bring the rains.
Well, yeah, and tune back into Garden Hour and sort of see how everything's going for all of our hosts and our guests. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Kristine and Kristina, for hanging out with me. And we'll see folks back here again next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain. And until then, happy gardening.